Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll wait just a couple more minutes to allow everyone to join in, but thank you for joining us this morning. All right. Thank you so much again for joining us this morning for this virtual tour of the Timken Museum. We're so happy to have you with us. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Please keep yourselves muted throughout the presentation. If you do have a question, we'd be happy to take those at the end. Please feel free to add your question to the chat function, and we'd be happy to address those at the end. If you're joining us over Facebook Live, you can do the same and use the comment section there in order to ask your questions, and we'd be happy to answer those at the end as well. Lastly, this tour is being recorded and it will be posted on our social media channels and our YouTube channel once the tour is over. So please feel free to go back and listen if you wanted to, or check out other tours that have been put on by the Timken. Those are all there as well. Without further ado, I'm so excited to turn things over to our two docents who are presenting today, Jerry and Barbara. They're going to be presenting on some new acquisitions to the Timken from 1995 to 2005. So I'll go ahead and let them get started. Thanks so much, Jerry and Barbara.
Thank you, Samantha. I am Jerry Veal, and Barbara and I welcome you to our exploration of the acquisitions by the Timken between 1995 and 2005 through the Putnam Foundation. We will be presenting these pictures in the order of their acquisition. Next slide, please, Samantha. No other element of a museum's mission creates as much excitement as an important new acquisition. A new acquisition demonstrates a commitment to the continued growth and refinement of the museum's holdings. Much time and effort go into each acquisition, and many individuals are involved in the process. Issues such as the quality and significance of the work and its attribution, provenance, condition, and asking price must all be addressed before it is added to the permanent collection. This is a very complex process, and the Timken endeavors to be sure that the pieces that are added to the collection are outstanding and worthy of being included. Let's look at our first acquisition. Samantha, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. This is Niccolo di Buonaccorso's Madonna and Child, done in 1387. There it is, with tempera and gold on wood panel, and it was acquired by the foundation in 1998. This exquisite and well-preserved painting, 633 years old, it's hard to believe, is a gorgeous example of 14th century art. It is a very large piece. It's almost 5 feet tall by 2 feet wide. The Madonna is seated on a Gothic throne with within a decorative golden framed alcove. Her head is inclined toward the Christ child, her hand reaching for a small white rose, a symbol of purity he is offering from his basket on his lap. That basket also holds strawberries on the vine, another symbol of purity and of motherhood. And they also signify holiness and righteousness, which is saying that the Christ child is without sin. Now, this robe, you can see she's got a gilt dress with a voluminous blue robe, also trimmed with gilt and decorative items. And you'll notice that if you look closely, she has a very thin linen veil under which her hair can be seen, which is an amazing example of the artist's technique, being able to show something underneath that sheer linen cloth. The courtly Gothic style is late Buonaccorso. This is done about about a year before his death in 1388, and still shows Byzantine influences. You can see the elongated face, the narrow eyes and long nose and small mouth, while the newer Renaissance influences are shown in the drapery of the robes and the architectural design of the alcove and the throne upon which she sits. These sharp architectural items provide a platform and uh, particular space in which the Madonna can be seated, and shows her importance and puts her on display to the faithful that are looking at the picture. The golden framework around the alcove is pastilia, which is material that's been built up and creates the circular arches around the entrance to the alcove. Her gilt gown is done with a method called sgraffito, which is gilt paint applied to the gown space and then painted over with a gold paint. Then they scrape that gold paint away, and in this case probably also use a stamp, and it creates that brocade effect that is seen on her gown. The Stella Maris, or Stars of Mary, are visible on her right shoulder and faintly visible on her left also. This painting was identified in 1980 as the central piece of an altarpiece done for the Church of Santa Margherita a Costolpino, just outside of Siena. It was one of the very few actually signed by Bonaccorso, although at the time of discovery, the signature was misread and the attribution was incorrect. This particular work was first documented in 1822 by a Sienese historian, and 20 years later, the signature had been corrected and it was acknowledged to be Bonaccorso, but it was still one of the few paintings that had been identified as his to that date. Although he had been known of through writings and entries on calendars and that sort of thing, they hadn't really found many of his works that were obviously Bonaccorso. So at the time, he was still considered a relatively minor Sienese painter, although very, very skilled. His importance wasn't yet known. By the time of the 1950s, this painting finally hit the art market. It had been essentially lost to the public until then. And at that time, it was obvious that Bonaccorso was better than just a few miniaturists and that sort of thing. This was definitely a high quality, very skilled painting on wood that had been done for the church. Before that, he had been thought to have been mainly focused on miniatures, which are shown in this next painting. Let's have the next slide, Samantha, please. This is a small triptych that the Timken acquired in 1967. And you can see why people thought he was specializing in miniaturists. This is not a large painting, but exquisite. And let's move on to the next slide, please, Samantha. You can see the difference, the small picture being so delicate, but in actuality, it's probably not more than about 12 inches, if that, while the Madonna and Child on the right is 5 feet tall. However, the similarities in the faces and of the child and the built-up pastiglia and the gilt dress, you can see that Bonaccorso had the same idea of Mary and the child throughout, even though about 17 years, it looks like, stretches between the paintings of these two works. The restoration of the side panels, because the Madonna and Child on the right is actually a triptych. One of the side panels has been found and it has been restored, which led to the affirmation of the artist and the quality of the Madonna and Child by the Timken. The size and the lavishness of this piece indicates that it was probably a very expensive commission of importance and prestige. Very much worthy of Bonaccorso's fame as an exquisite 14th century painter of Sienese provenance. So let's move on to the next painting. Now we're going to leap forward to the 19th century. and a totally different type of work. This is a still life, obviously, Cutlet and Vegetables, 1816, done by Raphael Peale, oil on panel. This is an incredible work, Peale's largest known work. It's about 18 by 24 inches. It appears that Peale also felt this was one of his most important works because he actually enlarged this piece. He added about an inch across the bottom of this piece, and it enabled him to really show the ledge upon which these items sit. He also added his signature. It's a little hard to see here, but his signature is on the edge of this panel on the right, and it says Raphael Peale in Philadelphia at 1816. Now, this edge and the space below the edge enhances the feeling that this is a display. It gives a little bit of distance between the viewer and the picture, which is necessary because this is a very real painting of this cut of meat, which is a little bit off-putting to some. This is only two of pictures of Peale by Peale that he did, which included meat. He usually did fruit and vegetables and nuts and things, but he was very focused on this and one other. Now, that could be because there was a rising in Philadelphia at the time and throughout the scientific community of the importance of anatomical dissections. And the scientific handbooks were available to those of the elite. And Peale's family was of the elite in Philadelphia. And he was also an expert taxidermist. So those two interests combined, I believe, added to his skill at being able to picture this cut of meat wrapped in butcher paper with wooden pins. It really pops out of the picture and overshadows the lettuce and the asparagus behind and the scallion and the herbs below. It's a lot more real and almost human. And in person, the meat almost looks wet. It's a very, really an amazing depiction. And the visceral reaction that some people have is quite interesting because it is such a skilled picture. Now, Peale's relationship with his father, who was a well-known artist, also Charles Wilson Peale, was very fraught with tension. Peale was one of 10 children, 5 of whom lived. They were all named for artists. Raphael was the oldest, and his siblings that survived were Rembrandt, Titian, Rubens, and Sylvanistre. All were artists. Unfortunately, his second eldest brother, Rembrandt, became a skilled portraitist and history painter, and his father felt that that was much more worthy. Still lives were not popular at all, and his father felt were beneath the notice of a Peale. Nevertheless, Raphael worked in the family museums and did a lot of his father's taxidermy, much unfortunately to his health's destruction further in life, and married in averse to his father's wishes and had a large family, which he had a great deal of trouble supporting. By the time he was about in his late 30s or almost 40, his health was almost destroyed. He had been exposed to large amounts of arsenic and mercury and was poisoned by those amounts when he was doing his taxidermy with his father's museum. Because of his health issues, he basically retired from life and concentrated on still life painting. Even though at the time, as I mentioned, was not seen as worthy of Peale's work. Let's move to the next slide, please, Samantha. Here you see a piece that is more typical of Peale's work. It's utensils and serving dishes, lemon, orange, and nuts. It's meant to effect kind of an air of relaxation after dinner. This is a dessert by Peel, meaning you've had a large meal, you just want a few things to nibble on with perhaps some nice dessert wine, and have a period of luxury and calm after a dinner. Now, the portrait that you see on the left is a portrait that was actually painted by his father. Shows the family's focus on painting, certainly, but also shows almost a little belligerence, I think, in Peele's face as his father paints his picture. Now, Peele is known as the first and foremost still life painter from America, and now receives all the acknowledgments that he is due as the finest still life painter of his generation. Now, Barbara is going to tell us about another 19th century American artist with a completely different take on still life paintings. Barbara?
Thanks, Jerry. I appreciate it. Now, at the outset this morning, Jerry stated these words: "A new acquisition demonstrates a commitment to continued growth and refinement of the Timken holdings." And this is true of the painting I'm going to discuss with you now, entitled "In the Library" by John Frederick Pato. Now, this was printed, as Jerry said, in the same general era, which is the latter part of the 19th century, and acquired by the Putnam Foundation in the year 2000. Now, during the time that the picture was painted, it was an interesting time in our society. Obviously, there was no mass media. So for pleasure or R&R, a lot of people, especially the middle and upper classes, actually had libraries in their home in which they can enjoy their favorite pastime, reading. And that's what this researchers believe is depictive in this painting. Now, the library was obviously a kindred place to the artist's studio, where on it, or in it, he resided with creativity as the stuff of culture. Now, looking at the painting, and before addressing the specifics of the painting in detail, I'd like to just make some general observations about the painting. Obviously, and Jerry mentioned this also, it is a still life. And it's a still life that shows objects which look at us with their inability to move, and which for the artist's purpose are grouped in a composition. Now, in composing a still life, an artist such as Pato composes it either in his mind or in the physical actuality. And we're not sure if it was a combination of the two or one or the other. Regardless, this is the result. And he and others of the era address the formal properties of still lifes. And those formal properties of still life art encompass shapes, texture, and colors. And those are of utmost concern of this type of still life painting. Now, John Frederick Pato's still life in the library is also a tribute to the themes of American culture at the time. He also, in his, most of it self-education, but some of it not, and I'll get into that as we continue, he used what originated in France, and it's called trompe l'oeil. I am using the English pronunciation of that. And that artistic term refers to a trick of the eye or an illusion. So when we see a still life, the artist's hope is that we look at it and believe it's a portrait of reality. So here we see a random assortment of books, the covers catching light in a bold manner. Simultaneously, we observe abstract patterns of rectangles and parallelograms. The books are all nameless and badly worn. The leather bindings are scuffed and torn. The pages and loose papers are also very well used, and you can see them on the right-hand side of that picture. A book cover in the forefront hangs by a thread of book binding. But also on the table to the top left, before we get to the darkened section, is a single candle that has gone out, resting on a sky blue tablecloth along with the books. The use of soft light and some subdued colors, highlighted by the bright color, especially of the tablecloth, and some orangey color in books, are depictive of Peto's style. Now in here, we see that he used the elements of still life. We can see the shapes, which I already mentioned, and we can certainly see rectangular shapes and parallelogram shapes. The texture is mainly in the tablecloth, and the color is the brightness of the cloth, a few of the books, the subdued colors of other books, but also the dark color on the top. And the dark color on the top actually perhaps speaks about the mood of the painting, which art historians have cataloged as sadness and calmness. Peto evokes the mood in particular through his dark tones of the background and the positioning of the anonymous books and the tablecloth on which they sit. Now, if you go to the next slide for us, Samantha. In artistic terms, the picture appears dynamically balanced. The tension between image and effect is part of the picture's strengths. Now to the last slide. Our Timken painting on the left is actually one of the largest that Peto painted, and it's approximately 24 inches by 42 inches. So many of his paintings were much smaller than that. And in the Timken painting, Peto has increased the dark vertical expanse of space above and below the table, which researchers again believe lent itself to the feeling of calmness. And also, Peto elaborates the point of view of this painting by slightly painting it in such a way that we, the viewer, look down a bit on the books from an angle. And that also leads to the theme of calmness and the tension that evolves here between the books and the scene. Now, the artist himself, Peto, there's very little that had been known about him. And researchers who studied him basically from about the 1960s onward all came to the conclusion that he was a bit of an eccentric. And I think this photograph of him with that lamp and what's around him may even depict this a little bit, I'm not sure. Researchers state that the idiosyncrasies of his personality and habits continued in later years, where he was in a hermit-like existence, but it was also a creative time, more creative perhaps than even when he was younger. And as I continued to look into this newer research, I discovered that the creativity certainly just didn't pop up in his later years, but it actually began in his childhood. He had taken an interest in drawing and sketching when he was a child. And by the 1870s, he committed himself to be an artist. And in 1877, he enrolled in the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. And then shortly thereafter, he married and they had one child. And with his wife and young son, they moved to New Jersey, where he remained basically what I had said, as a hermit and in his creative period. Now, after his death, decades later, the art critic known as Alfred Frankenstein, published research on the still life of that period, the late 19th century. And among the artists he studied was Pato and his mentor and friend, William Michael Harnett. And what he discovered in this research was a lot of the art that had actually been attributed to Harnett had actually been done by Pato. Among them, the painting that the foundation, the Putnam Foundation, acquired here at the Timken. So that research was years later, decades later, was certainly pertinent. And today we are the ongoing recipients of this great work. And so we can realize that artists like Pato and those among him who painted still life in that era, their still life comes through a very interesting sequential process of creativity that they go through. First, they have to conceive it, they select it, they arrange it, they transform it, and finally they paint it. So it's an interesting sequence, different than certainly some of the other paintings that we have at the Timken. So in conclusion, I would say that John Frederick Pato's still life paintings offer us an index, respectively, to his culture, his time, and to himself, that enables us to discover that his work is about America, it's about his autobiography, and certainly it's about art. And art is specifically this type of art. Now, Jerry had her last painting that we had acquired in 2000. This painting was acquired in the year 2000. Now Jerry will continue with another painting of a more recent acquisition that was acquired in the year 2005. Jerry?
Thank you, Barbara. That was a really great juxtaposition of two totally different but extremely talented still life artists, both important additions to the American Gallery of the Timken. Now here we've jumped forward and also gone back in time. This is an acquisition, as Barbara mentioned, by the Putnam Foundation in 2005. It's a painting from the 17th century, however, by Anthony Van Dyck, Mary Villiers, Lady Herbert of Shurland, done in 1636. Now, Mary Villiers was a child of the court from the very beginning. Her father was the very first Duke of Buckingham, and he was a close advisor to King Charles I. In this gorgeous portrait, Mary Villiers, about 14 years old. Unfortunately, she's already a widow. She was betrothed between 3 and 5 years of age to Charles Lord Herbert, the firstborn and heir to the Duke of Pembroke. This is a dynastic union done for purely political reasons to bring two divided, powerful families together. They were married at 12 and 15, respectively, reportedly without consummation. But after the marriage, Charles immediately left for war on the continent and fought in the Italian army, actually. He unfortunately died of smallpox a year later. This picture is done relatively shortly after his death and essentially is announcing the return of Lady Mary to the marriage market for political reasons. Now, that we believe is the reason that she is not shown in what we would normally think of as widow's weeds, but instead, Van Dyck shows her in this gorgeous satin silk, garbed with a black bow at her waist and her bodice, definitely signifying her widowhood, but also showing her in quiet dignity and grace. Her left hand points to the black bow in recognition of her widowhood. Her right hand holds a rose that is just past its prime, indicating the death of her spouse. She's posed against a softly brushed background that sets off the smoothness and the translucency of her skin, her drooping eyelids, very pale and pink showing through. Some of her skin tones almost gray because the veins are so easily seen beneath that pale, delicate skin. She has drop pearl earrings and a drop pearl necklace, emphasizing yet again both her physical and moral purity. Now, let's go to the next slide, please, Samantha. This painting on the right is actually a family portrait of the 4th Earl of Pembroke. This is the family into which she was betrothed at such a young age. And as this picture is done a few years before the prior, you can see how important she is to this family, because Lady Mary is actually front and center in this family portrait, even though technically she's not yet part of the family. Now, this is a really interesting portrait because reportedly it shows the tension and the dissension within the family. You'll notice that nobody's looking at any of the other family members. The couple on the right-hand side is the elder sister with her spouse. They're married. The Countess of Herbert is sitting stiff, arms folded across her lap or across her center, looking straight out. The father, the Duke, in the middle, or excuse me, the Earl in the middle, reaching out to Lady Herbert, to Mary Villiers. Perhaps she will bring some peace to the family. The young man in red satin to the Earl's right is Charles, her prospective husband. You can see he knows that he's the important man in the family. He's quite the dandy and standing upright and posing. The young man to his right in yellow is his younger brother, reportedly, who also had an interest in Mary, sadly. And there are 3 youths off to the other side of the painting with dogs. They're dressed much more solemnly in black and dark brown, and there are angels above them, the same number of angels as youths. That is because these are 3 children that did not live, very sadly, and yet acknowledged in the painting. This is a very interesting family portrait, beautiful and evocative in its way. Lady Mary, unfortunately, or fortunately, married twice more after Charles' passing and had 2 children. She unfortunately outlived everyone and died at 63, but she ostensibly was quite a favorite at court and spent many, many years at court, was a favorite of Queen Henrietta, Charles I's queen. Now let's turn to the artist, Anthony Van Dyck, a very, very flamboyant, interesting individual, as you can kind of tell by his self-portrait. Now Van Dyck was from a very prosperous family. He was born in Antwerp, the 7th of 12 children, in a very religious family, surprisingly. His talent was evident very, very early. At 10, he left the family to go to study painting with an artist named Hendrik van Balen, who was with the Guild of St. Luke with professional painters in Antwerp. And he became one of the professional organizations, a group of painters. By the time he turned 18, he had moved on to join the studio of Peter Paul Rubens, and Rubens felt he was the best of my pupils, in a quote. He quickly became even better known and was even commissioned to do a very important cycle of paintings for one of the de Medicis, after which he decided to move to London. Now, London became his home. He made many trips back and forth to the continent, but London was truly his home. He began painting for the King James I, but eventually Charles came into power, and he and Charles really formed a bond. Charles knighted Van Dyck, and he became the principal painter for the court. And he actually did over 70 paintings of King Charles and his bride, and over 30 paintings of other members of the court at the time. He had incredible style and was very innovative in his painting. His paint strokes were so fluid that it is said that you can recognize his strokings immediately and differentiate them from what perhaps students in his studio would have done in the background. So perhaps in this Pembroke family picture, he definitely did the portraits that are seen, but perhaps his students may have done some of the brushwork in the background. But apparently his was so distinctive that it can be identified instantly. He was an important innovator of watercolor and of areas in etchings, and his etchings are studied to this day. He also, outside of the art world, was very important in style. He invented, obviously, the Van Dyck style of facial hair, the beard trimmed just so with this small bit on the chin. He also had special collars that he innovated. In fact, the collars shown on the king in this, or excuse me, the earl in this portrait were very, very much Van Dyck lace collars. There is unfortunately not really sufficient time to go into so much of Van Dyck's flamboyant life. I recommend that you see some of the other recorded tours that are on this website, because a number of our docents have done much more in-depth look at various pictures, the Pio and this Van Dyck, and have much more time to do an in-depth study of each artist. So I recommend highly that you look at some of the other recordings. They're really wonderful. Now, Barbara is going to take us back in time, back to modern times again, with another acquisition that is the last acquisition by the Timken during this time period. Barbara?
Thank you, Jerry, for again showing us the quality and significance of one of our newer acquisitions, the Van Dyck painting. Now, lastly, I am going to show the last acquisition, which was 2005, as Jerry mentioned. And I am actually going to begin, it's with, you can see here, it's Thomas Moran, Opus 24, Rome from the Campagna, Sunset, and it was done in 1864. But Moran was quite an eclectic artist, and among his talents, he was also a writer, and some of his words remain with us today. And therefore, I'd like to begin with words that he himself has written. He states, "I use my memory. This I have trained from youth up, so that while sketching and coloring, I impress indelibly upon my mind the features of the landscape and the combinations of coloring, so that when back in the studio, the watercolor will recall vividly all the striking peculiarities of the scene visited." And this is exactly what he does here. Moran, who was from Pennsylvania, left his home as a young adult. He was about, and he was in his 20s, and he would visit Europe often. And he often then went to Rome. And this was his actual last visit to Rome. And he was very taken in with this area south of Rome called the Campagna. And the Campagna is where he and a lot of people of his artistic generation, they found inspiration here in the landscapes of south of Rome in Italy. And it was this experience of Italy's Campagna and this pastoral landscape that actually inspired Moran. And it was what researchers believe was the time of his transformation to landscape painting, of which he's so well known here in America. Now, the work here helped, as I said, bridge his movement onward. And he did Western landscapes, and those became his hallmark. Now, the name of this work is often referred to as Rome from the Campagna, but you notice Opus 24. He was quite an eclectic artist, and he did so much. He was eclectic because he just came up with so many paintings and drawings and sketches and writings that for a time he numbered them. And so Opus 24 was his numbering system. And this was number 24. He numbered 42 of his paintings. And you can see this is pretty much one that he did in the middle and one that researchers believe was the transition time. And as I said, it's a transition, but it's also a preface or a prelude to Moran's Western United States landscape. And here and there, they're detailed, tight compositions, which give way to a sense of a panoramic space in a relatively small format, but still evolves into a sense of deep space and largeness. The actual painting that's in our gallery is the same as my previous one. It's about 24 inches by 42 inches. So it's, I guess, not super small, but not one of our largest either, but it gives that impression of being large because of what I just said. Now, specifically looking at this painting, Moran positioned the ruins and an aqueduct in the middle ground, standing out against a dramatic sunset with vibrant hues and ominous cloud formations. The middle ground is expansive, and the ruins and trees on the left form a distant mass in the picture and appear to be in balance with the aqueduct on the right. The dark, dense foreground has vegetation highlighted by remnants, especially the remnants of the aqueduct. He also highlighted, it is also highlighted by him of the representation of the evening sun. So therefore, the aqueduct gradually arcs back and it leads our eye into the distance. And the distance is a swath of land. And it's hard to see on the screen here, but when we see it in the museum, it's a little bit more succinct. So our eye then goes all the way to these buildings, which you can tell is certainly Rome, because this is south of Rome. And I was looking on the painting because if you look real carefully at the original, you can see the dome of that is so visible in Rome, that our current Pope and other popes have lived. But I felt yesterday I was looking for where's Waldo, and I finally gave up. And I even went with where you can change the pixels, and I thought, we know it's there, and it's on the original, you can see it. So when he returned to America after this, the national style of art was beginning to evolve. And it was beginning to evolve to a new style of art because artists in the New World in America, they wanted an alternative to European culture and European history. So that led to picturesque, patriotic, and inspirational art. And Thomas Moran became one of those painters, and he was, a painter who depicted the landscaping. So if we move to the next slide now, Samantha. Oh, I think we did, don't we have a picture of him? Oh, thank you, I appreciate that. Here we have the painting again and a picture of him on the right. So as I already said, and you can see here from the date, he was prominent in the latter part of the 19th century. And he actually had originated and been a part of that Hudson River School that was developed in the early 1800s, but he studied it. And the movement was all about landscape painting, but above all, he's like that painting that was called Virgin Nature. And that Virgin Nature term refers to the landscape of the West. Now, going back in his life, I said, was here in America, but his family had come when he was just 8 or 9 years old from England, and they were part of the early mass of people that began to migrate here, certainly at the turn of the century. And his family moved to America, and he spent, when he was a child after moving here, many days painting, which led to an inquisitive and adventurous nature. In early childhood, as I already said, he and his family would visit Europe. And then, as the art historian states, and I have already mentioned, he continued with that, but the art historian Joni Kinsey states, by the end of the 19th century, Moran's landscape views, especially of Yellowstone and the Grand Canyon, were becoming recognized. Moran's work then and now was seen as both accurate and eloquent, with the same sense of place conveyed as much by his spirit as by his experience. But perhaps above all else, his significance lies in his capacity of his work to influence the popular consciousness and a nation's sense of itself. Another art historian, Robert Allerton Parker, states, Moran's expression has stepped into our very culture. Perhaps more than any other American painter of that era, Thomas Moran compelled the American people to appreciate the beauty of our own continent. Today, Jerry and I, if you move the screen, Samantha, explored the Timken's more recent acquisitions, because once again, we wanted to share with you the fact that art demonstrates a commitment not only to a museum's growth, but maybe to our growth a bit too. That's what we would hope for. And the words on our screen say it all. Knowing the background behind each piece of art is a passion for us here at the Timken Museum of Art. When visitors come either live when the museum is open or through Zoom, we take pride in presenting each painting story, including the symbolism and the artist's background. So Jerry and I thank you for exploring this journey with us today. So now Jerry and Samantha, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much to Jerry and Barbara for what a fantastic presentation on these new acquisitions. A virtual round of applause. At this point, I'd be happy to take any questions. I see some already. So the first one that I have is from Katie, asking, do you think the choice to not include titles or authors on the books, as well as the somber tones in Peto's In the Library, could be representative of his own entrance into obscurity and hermit-like lifestyle in 1889 as a symbolic self-portrait, which is like a super interesting question.
Yes, and I think I can answer that because I actually came across that in my research on him. And researchers, and I said at the onset when I was speaking of him, until the last 50 years, there was very little known about him. But researchers do believe what our viewer thinks, that it perhaps is about him, or maybe he's saying something about the times changing, or even about potential viewers, that all of us, we come to an end, or we age, or whatever. And so do you know what art historians therefore say? It's up to us to decide. We can go on and interpret it. And certainly it would open a lot of discussion, and maybe a whole new presentation on him and the work and digging into his background, because did he really leave it so open-ended? Is there more to to discover? Or did he truly mean, as art historians believe, that it's up to us, that it's symbolic of everything growing and ending? So there we go.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something to take notice of. The fact that there are no titles on that book and that they're so worn is a very interesting thing to notice. So yeah, thank you so much for that question, Katie. I see some other comments from Daniela talking about the Campagna. Just kind of some notes. It means countryside in Italian. So, a view of Rome from the countryside. And there's also a region called La Campagna in the south of Italy with its, main city of Naples. So could, kind of pertain to either of those. So thank you for those comments, Daniela. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to add them to the chat. While you're doing so, I'll just go ahead and mention again, as I mentioned at the top of this presentation, and as Jerry alluded to as well, this presentation, as well as others done by the Timken, are on our social media page. So our Facebook, our YouTube channel, all of those. Please feel free to go back and check those out. There are some really fantastic presentations that are posted. This one will be posted later, so if you wanted to go back and see anything else, please feel free to do so. We're so happy to be able to still be bringing you virtual programming while the Timken is closed for renovation. So we're so happy to have you here. And then if you wanted information on future tours done by the Timken, you can check out our website and go into the events calendar there, and you'll be able to get information for all of our future tours. But I don't see any other questions. So again, I will go ahead and thank Jerry and Barbara for again putting together such a fantastic presentation for us. This is a really interesting look at some, really select pieces from the Timken that are, newer to the collection. And Danielle is saying thank you as well. So thank you again, Jerry and Barbara.
Can I just add something?
Absolutely.
Jerry and I did a presentation where we took our executive director's words, which are to educate, excite, and experience art, or she refers to them as the 3 E's. And as Jerry was speaking, I thought, anytime we present, those terms fall into the same perspective. So even though we looked at the newer art today, those 3 terms are still very pertinent. We hope that all of us became a little bit educated, more so than we may have already known. We got more excited, and our experiences have broadened. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.